The mic is hot. Let's break this down. You know, sometimes I really hate being right. I honestly do. Because usually when I'm right about this kind of stuff, it means everything just got a whole lot more dangerous for the rest of us. Grab your coffee, sit down. You need to see this. Remember the photos? Of course you do. They were plastered on every screen, every feed, every newspaper from New York to Moscow back in March. Mar-a-Lago, the gold curtains, the thumbs up, that firm handshake. The Brotherhood of Strength, they called it. The media told you it was the dawn of a new era. They told you peace was inevitable because, hey, these guys, they get each other. They speak the same language of power. The narrative was set in stone. The sanctions are ending, the pipelines are opening, and everyone holds hands into the sunset. Well, I hope you didn't bet the farm on that fairy tale, because what I'm holding right here, this document, it isn't a peace treaty. It's a declaration of economic war. I'm looking at the text of the new executive order, the one signed quietly while most of the East Coast was asleep, and it is brutal. I mean, visceral. This isn't a slap on the wrist. This isn't diplomatic pressure. This is the United States Treasury reaching into the chest cavity of the Russian economy and squeezing the heart until it stops beating. We aren't talking about obscure banks no one's heard of. We are talking about Rosneft. We are talking about Lukoil, the giants, the untouchables. And that's why my phone has been blowing up since 4 a.m. Because the narrative, that pro-Russia narrative everyone was so sure about, it didn't just crack, it shattered. The Kremlin isn't spinning this. They're not doing that thing where they pretend it doesn't matter. Peskov came out, and you rarely see him like this. Usually he's so cool, so detached. But he came out and called it a betrayal of the handshake. Think about those words. Betrayal. That is personal. That is the language of a man who thought he had a deal, who thought he had a partner, and woke up to find a knife in his back. And here is the kicker. Here is the part that should make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The media is treating this like a sudden pivot, like Trump just woke up on the wrong side of the bed. But if you actually look at the dates on these foreclosure protocols, if you look at the wind-down clauses buried on page 42 of the OFAC guidance, this wasn't impulsive. This was planned. While they were shaking hands in Florida, while they were eating steak and talking about a new future, the lawyers were already drafting the kill order. It's almost Machiavellian, isn't it? It's the kind of thing you see in movies, not in international diplomacy. And now we're staring down the barrel of Q1 2026, and 40% of Russian oil revenue is about to vanish into thin air. Poof, gone. So ask yourself, if the friendship was a lie, if the deal was a trap, what happens when the guy who got played decides he's done playing nice? Because that's where we are. We aren't in the negotiation phase anymore. We're in the retaliation phase. And unlike the guys in the suits signing these papers, you and I, we don't have a bunker to hide in when the energy markets react to this. You seeing the pattern here? They sell you the handshake, but they deliver the fist. Stay with me, because we need to go back to the beginning to understand how we got tricked this badly. To understand the knife, you have to look at the hand that held it. And to do that, we have to go back to March. Do you remember the Spring of Hope? That's what the talking heads called it. March 2025. Mar-a-Lago. The sun was shining, the flags were waving. It was pure theater. You had the photos of them on the patio, steaks on the grill, no ties, laughing like old college buddies. The headlines were screaming, "Peace in our time." And the markets, they loved it. The ruble rallied, oil stabilized, and everyone in Moscow breathed a sigh of relief because they thought the adults were back in the room. They thought the deal was done. But here's the secret, the thing that no one in the mainstream media wants to admit because it makes them look like idiots for buying the hype. While the cameras were clicking in Florida, a very different meeting was happening in a windowless room at the Treasury Department. I'm talking about the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, the Financial Special Forces. While Trump was pouring the wine, his Treasury Secretary was drafting Executive Order 14024, Amendment B. They weren't writing a peace treaty, they were writing a kill list. Now, I know what the TV anchors are saying right now. They're saying, oh, this is just Trump being Trump. He's erratic. He woke up angry. They want you to believe this is chaos. Don't fall for that. That is the straw man argument. It's the lazy explanation. You don't accidentally sanction two of the largest oil companies on Earth. You don't accidentally wipe out $11 billion in monthly revenue. This isn't a tweet. This is a siege. They waited. They waited through the summer. They waited through the Alaska summit in August, smiling the whole time. They let Russia get comfortable. They let them build their budget around the idea that the pressure was coming off. And then, November 21st. That was the date the wind-down licenses expired. That was the trap door. The moment the clock struck midnight, the entire financial infrastructure supporting Rosneft and Lukoil turned into radioactive dust. Let's talk about what that actually looks like on the ground, because numbers on a screen are boring, but hunger is real. I was reading a report from a logistics guy in St. Petersburg this morning. He said the Ghost Fleet, those shadow tankers Russia uses to smuggle oil to India and China, they're parked. They aren't moving. Why? Because the new sanctions don't just target the oil, they target the insurance. No insurance, no port entry, no cash, no cash. The data dropped yesterday. Oil revenue is down 34% year on year. 34%. Do you understand what that does to a country that is effectively a gas station with a flag? That isn't a recession, that is a cardiac arrest. We are seeing reports of heating grids failing in Novosibirsk because they can't import the replacement parts for the turbines anymore. We are seeing the price of butter in Moscow hit levels that make our inflation look like a joke. And the cruelest part? The false hope. There are still people in the Kremlin, and probably some people in this chat, thinking, well, maybe this is just a negotiation tactic. Maybe Trump is just squeezing them to get a better deal in January. Wake up. You don't burn down the house to negotiate the rent. This isn't a squeeze, it's a liquidation. And the guy they thought was their savior, he just signed the foreclosure papers. Does that make sense? You see how the chaos is actually a script? But wait, because you need to understand how they actually did it without crashing the global economy. It's a mechanism so smart, it's actually kind of terrifying. You still with me? Good, because this is the part where most people's eyes glaze over. They hear sanctions and they think of some boring bureaucrat stamping a paper in a basement in DC. They think, so what? Russia will just sell to China, right? They'll just use Bitcoin. They'll trade in gold bars. No. Stop. That is the old world. That is the 2022 playbook. What happened on November 21st, what Trump actually did, is completely different. And to explain it, I'm not going to use economic jargon. I'm not going to talk about SWIFT codes or correspondent banking or liquidity ratios. I'm going to talk about a nightclub. Stick with me here. Imagine the global economy is the most exclusive high-security nightclub in New York City, the Dollar Club. Everyone wants in. If you want to buy chips, if you want to buy tech, if you want to buy survival, you have to be inside the club. Now, for the last 3 years, Russia has been banned. They're standing on the sidewalk, shivering in the cold. The bouncers, the US and Europe, won't let them in. But Russia found a loophole. They found a side door. They found a friend inside the club. Let's call him the middleman. Maybe it's a bank in Turkey. Maybe it's a refinery in India. Maybe it's a shell company in the UAE. Russia hands cash to the middleman through the back window. The middleman goes into the club, buys the drinks, buys the tech, and hands it back out to Russia. It's clumsy, it's expensive, but it works. The party goes on. And this is where the Mar-a-Lago betrayal comes in. Russia looked at Trump and saw the owner of the club. They thought, okay, the owner likes us. We shook hands. He's going to tell the bouncers to open the velvet rope. They spent the whole year waiting for that rope to drop. They told their people, just wait until January. The boss is back. We're getting back in the VIP section. But Trump didn't tell the bouncers to open the door. He did something much, much meaner. He went inside the club, walked up to the middlemen, the Indian banks, the Chinese refineries, the Turkish logistics firms, and he put a gun to their heads. He didn't sanction Russia. He sanctioned the friends. He said, you see that guy outside in the cold? If you buy him one more drink, if you pass him one more napkin, I'm not just kicking him out, I'm kicking you out forever. You lose your membership, you lose your credit, you lose everything. That is the secondary sanction nuclear option, and it changes the physics of the entire world, because suddenly the Indian refinery that was happily buying Russian oil, they aren't looking at the profit margin anymore. They're looking at their own survival. They're looking at their access to the US dollar, and they are doing the math. Is it worth losing access to the entire Western financial system just to buy discount crude from Moscow? The answer is no. It's always no. So overnight, literally overnight, the middlemen ghosted. They stopped answering the phone, the side doors slammed shut, and now Russia isn't just banned from the club, they're alone in the alleyway and it's starting to snow. Honestly, I almost feel bad for them. Almost, because they painted themselves into this corner. I look at someone like Elvira Nabiullina. She's the head of their central bank. The woman is a genius. Evil, maybe, but a genius. She has spent 3 years playing 4D chess, keeping that economy alive with duct tape and prayers. She managed the inflation, she managed the currency flight, she probably thought she had it under control. She probably thought, we can survive the blockade because we have the shadow fleet. And then she wakes up on November 21st and the U.S. Treasury says, we're not blocking the ships, we're blocking the insurance on the ships. It's diabolical. You can't sail a tanker through the Bosporus Strait without insurance. It's illegal. No port will let you dock. If you spill oil, the cleanup costs are in the billions. No insurance, no movement. So now, Nabiullina is sitting in her office in Moscow, looking at a fleet of 400 tankers that are effectively floating bricks. They can't move, they can't sell, and the cash flow that pays for the war, it stopped. It's like watching a race car driver who thinks he's winning, but he doesn't realize someone cut the brake lines 3 laps ago. He's just hitting the straightaway now. He's accelerating. He thinks he's going to cross the finish line. But we know what happens next. Wait, hold on. I need you to really visualize this part, because it sounds like abstract finance, but it's actually physical. It's geology. Oil wells aren't like a kitchen faucet. You can't just turn them on and off. Russia sits on permafrost. It is cold. The oil coming out of the ground is hot. It keeps the pipes warm. It keeps the pressure up. If you stop the flow, if you can't sell the oil, so you have to stop pumping, the oil stops moving. And when oil stops moving in Siberia, it freezes. It turns into sludge. Then it turns into rock. The pipes burst. The water in the reservoir freezes and cracks the geological formation. If they have to shut down these wells because Trump cut off the buyers, those wells don't come back in 6 months. They don't come back in a year. They might never come back. We are talking about the permanent destruction of the production capacity of the second largest energy superpower on Earth. This is the domino effect. Domino 1, the executive order scares the buyers, India, China. Domino 2, the buyers cancel the orders for Q1 2026. Domino 3, the storage tanks in Russia fill up. There is nowhere to put the oil. Domino 4, they have to cap the wells. Domino 5, the wells freeze. The infrastructure dies. Domino 6, the revenue drops to zero. The state budget collapses. The subsidies for food and heat disappear. And that brings us to the terrifying part, the part that keeps me up at night. Because when a superpower realizes it is being strangled, when they realize the handshake was a trap and the walls are closing in, they don't just quietly go bankrupt. They don't just file for Chapter 11 and move to a smaller apartment. They lash out. I look at the map. I look at the pipelines. I look at the rhetoric coming out of the Kremlin this week. Betrayal, economic terrorism, war without limits. We are pushing a nuclear-armed state into a corner where their only option to survive economically, might be to flip the table over entirely. I know, it sounds like fiction. I wish it was. I wish I was reading a Tom Clancy novel. But I'm reading the Federal Register. I'm reading the shipping logs from the Baltic Sea. And the logs say, status stationary. The oil isn't moving. The money isn't moving. But the anger is moving very, very fast. And if you think this ends with a quiet bankruptcy in Moscow, you haven't been paying attention to history. So what does the next 6 months actually look like for you and me? Because if the Russian energy sector goes offline, if 10% of the world's oil vanishes from the market, that gas pump down the street from your house, it's about to become the most expensive piece of real estate in your town. Let's talk about the fallout, because the Trump flip isn't just a political maneuver. It's the first loose pebble in an avalanche. All right, take a breath. We've talked about the betrayal, the mechanism, and the dominoes. Now we have to talk about the part that actually hurts. We have to talk about tomorrow morning. I want to be very clear with you because I see a lot of people in the comments and a lot of experts on CNBC saying this will blow over. They're saying, oh, the U.S. is pumping more oil than ever. We have record production in the Permian Basin. Prices will stay low. That is the ugly truth. It is the most dangerous lie being told right now. Yes, the U.S. is pumping oil, but we are pumping light sweet crude. Russia pumps heavy sour crude. You can't just swap them out. It's like trying to put diesel in a Ferrari. The refineries in Texas, the refineries in Europe, they are built to run on a specific blend. If you take 3 million barrels of Russian heavy crude off the market overnight, the U.S. shale fields cannot save you. They physically cannot produce the right chemical grade to replace it. So here is what the next 6 to 12 months actually look like. First, you're going to see a bifurcation of price. That's a fancy way of saying we're going to have two economies. In the West, US, Europe, Japan, energy prices are going to spike. I'm not talking about a 10-cent hike. I'm talking about diesel hitting numbers that make trucking companies insolvent. Anything that moves on a truck, food, lumber, Amazon packages, is going to get slapped with a logistics surcharge. You're going to see it on your receipt. Fuel adjustment fee plus 15%. Second, watch the asymmetric warfare. This is the part that scares the intelligence community. Putin isn't going to fight this with tanks. He can't afford tanks anymore. He's going to fight it with chaos. If he can't sell his oil, he has no incentive to keep the shipping lanes safe. Why would he? If he can't use the table, he's going to flip it over. Expect accidents in the Strait of Hormuz. Expect cyber glitches at American LNG terminals. Expect undersea cables to mysteriously get cut. He needs to spike the global price of oil to maximize the revenue from the tiny trickle he has left. The only way he survives is if oil hits $150 a barrel. He's incentivized to break things. Now, let's zoom out. Let's look at the 2030 vision. If this executive order holds, if Trump doesn't blink, we're looking at the end of globalism as we know it. We're moving into a world of fortress economics. By 2030, you're not going to buy cheap plastic goods from halfway across the world because the shipping costs will be too high. The supply chains are going to shrink. You're going to see a world that is smaller, more expensive, and much more local. The neighborhood grocery store won't have avocados from Mexico in February anymore. The car dealership won't have chips from Taiwan on demand. It's going to feel a lot like the 1970s. Slower, harder, grittier. So what do you do? I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just a guy reading the fine print, but I can tell you what I'm telling my own brother. Number 1, kill your variable debt. If energy prices spike, inflation spikes. If inflation spikes, the Fed cannot cut rates. They might even have to hike them again. If you have a credit card with a floating rate or a HELOC, pay it off. Kill it. Cash is king, but debt is a death sentence and a volatility crisis. Number 2, tighten the circle. We're moving into a high-friction economy. Things are going to break. Services will get slower. You can't rely on the system to be frictionless anymore. Get to know your mechanic. Get to know the guy who sells you meat. Build a network of real people who can solve real problems when the app doesn't work. Number 3, don't panic about the gas pump. Panic about the heating bill. Gas is annoying. Freezing is deadly. If you live in the north and you rely on heating oil or natural gas, lock in your rates. Insulate the house. Get a backup heat source. The grid is going to be stressed, and energy is going to be the weapon of choice for the next decade. I know, this is heavy. I know you wanted to hear that Trump waved a magic wand and fixed it, but the truth is always better than a comforting lie. The handshake was a trap. The trap has been sprung, and now we are all locked in the room together to see who blinks first. Stay sharp, stay hidden. I'll see you in the comments.